So just a brief history of the ReBuild program. The ReBuild program is funded by American Rescue Plan dollars that were issued in 2021 and 2022 as a response to the COVID pandemic. We did a round of ReBuild in 2022. The City Council approved funding for the ReBuild KC grant program in early 2022, of which we received applications and made recommendations to the council last summer. I think the final award was in about August of 2022. In that first round, we received 1,215 applications, and then we ended up making 71 awards out of that. So we had a pretty good group of things to go through, and we learned a lot during that process, which you'll hear me talk about as we've incorporated into this year's program. The City Council did earlier this year during our annual budget process approve additional funding for what we're calling ReBuild 2.0 in 2023. That funding amount will be approximately $5 million that we have available for awards this year. I've gone over some of this already. These are federal funds. We are subject to federal funding stipulations and guidelines in how we distribute these awards and the types of programs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. As I said before, it was our American Rescue Plan was intended as COVID relief. The council approved approximately $5 million to be awarded this year. All funds that have been awarded to the city expire in December 2024. So as you're filling out applications or thinking about your program and your timeline and everything, that's a very important date to remember. Any funds that are not distributed by 2024 cannot be distributed. We have to reimburse the federal government for anything that we have not encumbered or actually expended by that point. For eligibility, like I said before, federal guidelines must be met. The organization or community being awarded the funds must have been affected by the pandemic in some manner. It must be a group that was affected by the pandemic. Other guidelines for eligibility is you must be able to enter into a contract with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, going through our normal procurement processes, which would require an organization to have insurance, a certificate of good standing with the state, and complete E-Verify documentation. And that's something we would get into at the time of an award, but something to think about ahead of time. And most importantly, must be able to meet the timeline that I discussed earlier of having a project or program completion by the end of 2024, and be able to meet our reporting requirements, which mirror the federal government's reporting requirements. It's reports that we have to submit back to the feds. So we would have to go through the same reporting requirements with any organization that we give money to. Eligible types of projects and programs. These are some of the primary federal categories that we are going to be looking for in these applications that we are going to be able to make recommendations for. So programs or projects that affect community violence interventions. Affordable housing or support. So things like affordable housing projects, relocation assistance for impacted communities, things like that. And there's better description of these on the website as well. If you look at that, you might be able to garner a little bit more out of that. Housing services for unhoused persons this would include services and housing for unhoused persons. Healthy childhood environments. Some examples might include childcare, home visits, services to foster youth, early learning programs, things like that. Strong, healthy communities. Examples might include neighborhood features that promote health and safety, or home repair programs, or rehabilitation of property programs. Job training programs. So job training programs for unemployed or underemployed persons. assistance to impacted nonprofits that perform a public benefit. So this would be assistance to impacted or disproportionately impacted not-for-profit organizations. During the pandemic, charitable donations were down across the board, so most not-for-profits experienced some sort of an impact, a negative impact from the pandemic. So the application itself, the deadline is due July 21st. The link is down at the bottom of where you can find the application. That's the ReBuild website. And Nancy or Monica, somebody, can you post that in the chat for me real quick too? Just post that link in the chat. But if you just Google Kansas City ReBuild grant, it will take you pretty much right to the ReBuild KC page. And you can find a lot of the information that I'm giving here. You'll be able to find this presentation. You'll be able to find the application on there. The maximum application amount is $1 million. I will throw this out that applications that are under $50,000 have significantly less reporting requirements on the awardees and on our end back to the federal government. Not that I'm saying you should apply for only $50,000, but those programs are much easier to manage for everyone involved. And we need the application filled out completely for our review process as well. Some key review items that we'll be looking at with the application are, and these are all on the application itself. Whenever you go to that, you'll see places to fill all of these things out, plus some other things as well. But we'll be looking at projects that have other partners and stakeholders involved, so they're more of a community type project or program, a very detailed project description, a very detailed section on what the benefit to the community is of this project or program that you're applying for. And a couple things we've added to this year's application that were not on last year's, just some things we learned about our reporting requirements and how our review process goes, is we would like to see a narrative write-up on how the success of this program will be measured, or what metrics will be used to measure the success and show that it was a good expenditure of federal dollars. A timeline, since we are under the federal deadline of being completed by the end of 24, we would like to see a fairly detailed timeline as part of the program, and an itemized budget for the program or project, what all you are proposing you are going to be able to spend dollars on, so that we can review that and make sure that all costs are eligible. So that was quick. I promised it'd be quick. This, like I said, this PowerPoint and this presentation in general will be posted, so you can come back to this later. So I'm going to sign out of it now and start going through some of your chat questions as soon as I figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so I will go through some of the chat questions now and try to answer those. Let's see. Will this recording be available? Yes, I already answered that. It will be on the website. Nancy Aguirre has posted the link to the city's website for ReBuild. I'm hearing a lot of dings, so a lot of you must be entering questions right now, so that's great. Okay, can funds be for capital expansion to meet the needs of the community? Yes, as long as they would fall under one of those categories. Is there a limit to the number of applications per organization? We haven't set any kind of a limit. I know in the first round, we had multiple applications from the same organization, and I think that's fine this time. So yep, there's no problem there. There's no limit. I mean, we'd rather not see 20 or 30 applications from one organization, but if an organization wants to submit multiple applications, that's fine. What date should we list as the project start date if the city council meets end of August, September or October? So yeah, so that's a good question because some of the project start date will not only depend on when the council makes these awards, which my goal is for the end of August after we get our new council takes effect the beginning of August. My goal is to take this program to them in their second or third meeting once the new council is in office. So that would mean potential ability to award date at the end of August. Now, at that point, then we have to still form a contract or a purchasing agreement, depending on the size of the contract, meet with the organization. So, it could be October-ish, October 1st. But for your timeline, I would maybe a suggestion would be to, if you know when you're going to have a start date, if it's going to be later in the year, I would put that. But otherwise, you could just do something like, start date month 1, then month 2, month 3, something like that as a timeline, or do it by quarter without specific dates, just keeping in mind that all program requirements must have been met by December of 2024. And some of that contracting timeline will be dependent upon the applicant too. There will be some paperwork that has to be gathered, and I know we've had a few applicants that have taken a little bit longer to get things accomplished administratively on their end as well. Can current ReBuild grantees apply for this round? Yes. If you already have a ReBuild grant with us, you can still apply again. When will funds be available? The funds are available now, but obviously it'll be after the council makes the or approves our recommendations. How current does the certificate of good standing have to be? I think it just has to be within the calendar year. I don't know if I don't think we have anybody from procurement on this call that could answer that question specifically, but I'm pretty sure it just has to be within the current calendar year or within 6 months. Is this a reimbursement model? Yes, it is. And I'm glad you asked that question. I did mean to mention that right up front. And that is lined out pretty clearly on our website too. Yes, we are constrained by federal requirements on this program. We have to do this as a reimbursement. So we can't just award the entire funds up front. It has to be on a reimbursement basis as the project moves along. With respect to itemized budget, do you want specific items like electrical, plumbing, et cetera, for construction projects? I would say on the itemized budget, be as specific as you possibly can up front. I know some things you may have to lump into categories because you don't know what specific costs will be until you get to the bid stage or anything like that. So you may have to lump, construction, programming, whatever, into larger categories. But if you're far enough along at the time of application that you know what those costs are, then yes, please do. When will we be notified? So that goes back to that council timeline. Like I said, my goal is to get this in front of the city council at the end of August. And as soon as the council approves it, it will be public information that we will post, and then we will notify individually immediately following. By what dates will the money be sent? Will you send it in 2 portions, midpoint and endpoint? No. So the way we've been handling the first round of distributions is we just pay reimbursement invoices as they come. So some organizations have submitted multiple. They can submit every couple weeks if they have eligible expenses, and some other organizations are submitting less frequently. So that really depends on the flow of your project or your program. We're not limiting it to just 1 or 2 distributions. We will make multiple distributions throughout the project. What funding is not allowable to include on the budget? I think that was one of the questions we had in our frequently asked questions as well on the website, specifically. So the one thing that we are not allowing is showing just an overall cost for indirect administrative rates. Some grants allow that. This one does not. So you need to itemize out, any administrative costs rather than just putting in a lump administrative fee of, 10% or 20% or something like that. We won't allow that. Can an organization apply under a fiscal sponsor and the fiscal sponsor itself submit separate applications? If I understand that question correctly, can an organization apply with another organization and then that organization submit separately? I would say yes, but we won't do two awards for the same project or program. So it would have to be for a separate program of some sort. Can you use the money for things that can be used for safety, like Ring doorbells and other? Potentially, as part of a violence prevention program, if it was, a community or a neighborhood-wide program, I think that's something we would review. I don't think we got any applications like that the first round, so that'd be interesting to review that. I tried to update a previous application instead of starting over, but I don't see a link. Yeah, our software that we use to track all of this doesn't allow you to go back in and update. To do that, we would have to assign like passwords and secured links and things like that. And our software is just not set up to do that. So if you had a previous application and you need to make some changes to it, I would advise you to submit a new application. So we do have a couple of new review categories on the new application that would probably be to your benefit to go ahead and fill those out now too. It gives us a clearer picture of your program. For neighborhood organizations that are not 501c3, are fiscal agents acceptable? I'm not sure I understand that question, actually. If you're not a 501c3, are fiscal agents acceptable? So we'll record that question and we'll try to address that on the frequently asked questions. We're writing down anything that I can't answer on the spot here. Will portal allow if applied last time? Can you simply edit and resubmit? Already answered that. No, our software doesn't allow you to go back in and edit a previous application. What is the timeline that the city has to reimburse the funds to the grantee? Well, we have to make all reimbursements and all expenditures by December of 2024. So that would be a deadline. As far as reimbursements during the course of the program, we will process those fairly quickly. Once we get a reimbursement request from an awardee and review it to make sure it's accurate and everything, we can process those payments pretty quickly.
Forrest, can I add something real quick on that?
Please do, Nancy.
Especially I know because this is a reimbursable grant, if someone is concerned about a larger purchase, the staff does, if you are worried about cash flow, anyone that's doing a reimbursement, if you let them know about a cash flow situation, the staff does reimburse quickly on planned ones, so they can do them as quickly as 3 to 5 days reimbursement. So anyone worried about those larger purchases, those can be planned in advance and reimbursed quickly. So it just takes communication and planning in advance. Anyone concerned about those?
Yep. Thanks for adding that in, Nancy. So that is a key if you do receive an award, is to keep in constant communication with our staff that you'll meet at your initial meeting. Where did I leave off? Is it only open to the initial applicants who did not receive first round of funding? No, this is an open grant call, so you didn't have to apply the first time to be eligible this time. More questions about reimbursement? Yes, I'll reiterate that this is a reimbursable grant program. With respect to the E-Verify requirement, if the organization is a single member LLC or a volunteer organization with no employees, how would the E-Verify requirement be met? It's been a while since I've been on the E-Verify website, but I think you can go on there and still just print that off that you're not required for an E-Verify. Will the city consider granting advance funds secured with a bond for startup? No, we can't do that. It's a reimbursable grant process only. Several questions on that. I'll skip over them. Will applications be presented to reviewers? We can, if we're not clear about an application or we want clarifying information about it, we may call some applicants in to be reviewed. We won't just automatically schedule every single applicant for review. The first time around, we had 1,215 applications. If we'd have scheduled even a 10-minute review with every single one of those, we'd have still been doing them. So that's why it's very important to fill out your grant application as completely and as accurately and as succinctly as you possibly can. That's what we will be using for the initial review. Are there allocations of grants by council districts? No, there's not. To state that simply, we're not allocating, X amount of dollars to District 1, District 2, District 3, District 4. That is somewhat up to the council members to help guide us in that, I guess. If they feel that there's not enough applicants in one district, they can certainly voice those opinions. And there will be, just like last time, there will be some back and forth discussion and presentations on that. Let's see. It appears that much of the funding last year went to larger, more well-known organizations, while smaller neighborhood services programs get more attention this year. I think last year we had actually a pretty good mix. We did fund multiple neighborhood associations, and I would say that they will be weighed equally this time as well. So I don't know that I haven't had any direction from anywhere to specifically emphasize any particular type of group. How much detail do you want in the budget and in the new required 12-month implementation timeline? Can you give us a bit on what you're looking for? Well, I've talked about this a little bit. So the budget, as I said, as much detail as you know at this time. If you don't know specific, for example, electrical costs, plumbing costs, things like that, if you don't have those itemized out, that's fine. Just include a construction category or something like that. Because I realize that some organizations won't go get competitive bids or anything until they actually get an award. We expect that, so that's just fine. The 12-month implementation timeline, like I said, as much detail as you can give. Some organizations are going to be a little bit more planned out on this. They're already going to have kind of a shovel-ready project ready to go or a program. Others may not, and that's fine either way. So just all I can say is just as much detail as you possibly can. How much does the general liability insurance need to be? Nancy, maybe you can help with that one too. Is it $2 million? Did the council raise that to $2 million a couple of years ago?
I know it was 1 million. I'll see if I can find out for sure. Give me a few minutes.
Okay. Yep. And if we don't get to that, we'll put it on the FAQs. It used to be 1 million. I think that we went to a $2 million in our boilerplate a couple of years ago. Does reimbursement have to be completed before December 2024? Yes. Do bids for home repairs need to be included in the application, or can they be submitted after? So they could be submitted after, I mean, as long as you stay within your budget. Reimbursement is for paid invoices only, even when goods may have already been delivered and work has already been done, correct? That's a question. So yeah, that's how reimbursement generally works. Whenever you submit to us a paid invoice for whatever the service is, whether it's just been materials delivered or work completed, either one, then at that point we would be able to process that reimbursement. Getting a lot of repeat questions, so I'm going to try to read through these and skip over some of those so I can get to new ones. Who all reviews the applications and will they be submitted to council for a collective approval? I'll answer the second part of that first. Yes, that's a stipulation of the program, is that all recommendations go to the city council for final approval. So they will make the final approval on any awards given. As far as who reviews, we'll do this time pretty much just like we did last time. We had most department directors involved. We had a great deal of city staff involved. I think we ended up having like 58 people on the review process last time. It was pretty intensive. So in the way we structured it, really no one person or even one department made the final decision. It was a cumulative effort. I represent a neighborhood association. How do we know if we are in good standing with the city of KC or know if we are able to enter a contract with you all? So basically we would help walk you through the vendor process if you're chosen for an award. And our office of our BizCare KC office can help with some of those items as well. So once we get to the award point and we're talking with you about making a contract award, we can help with some of those items. Minor home repairs listed as a priority. Last year, the city awarded $1 million to itself to manage minor home repair. Will the city award itself minor home repair program again? Possibly. I don't know yet. That'll ultimately be a council decision. I know, the city's minor home repair program is funded by HUD dollars, and it is generally very underfunded. There's some formula that the feds use to give the city a certain amount of dollars. We don't have really any application process to say how much we need or anything else. It's just a specified dollar amount is just given to us. And it's generally not enough to cover nearly all of the people that apply through the minor home repair program. So that's where some of the rebuild dollars in 2022 went to, was to augment that program, the minor home repair program for the city, and try to address some of that backlog of the people that don't get funded through the HUD process. So that's I'm not going to say yes or no, because frankly, I don't know the answer to that. It depends on whether applications we get, how much recommendations we make for those, and ultimately that decision will be up to the council. Is there a more detailed description of project categories? Nancy, is there a federal link that we can put in here that describes those categories out a little more detailed, or that we could put on the website?
I can put the category list from that I provided to you. I can put that out there. It doesn't go into any severe detail.
Okay.
But I can provide the list from the feds from ARPA.
Okay, so we'll try to beef up our descriptions a little bit on the website, on the ReBuild website. Is purchasing a building that will be renovated for the proposed program an allowable expenditure? I keep calling on you, Nancy, but if I remember correctly, that was an allowable expenditure.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Is purchasing a building that will be renovated for the proposed program an allowable expenditure?
as long as it fits into one of the categories and what the purpose is, depending on what the purpose is, yes, it can be. Depending on the cost of the building, that depends on what it is. Yes, it can be. We'd have to review the program. So, but yes, it can be.
I thought so. Thank you for verifying that. Okay, is there a percentage of funding that is available upon signing of the grant agreement? No, only expenditures that are incurred after the agreement is signed are eligible for reimbursement. Some more repeat questions. So
Boris, can I interject real quick on that one too?
Please do.
Especially for nonprofits, there are banks that will, and title companies that will work with nonprofits. So if you bring that contract that you have with the city to them, they will work with you on loans. So if you bring that contract saying you have a $250,000 contract with the city, that money's coming, they will work and loan you funds. So if you need that money up front to purchase, say, a $50,000 piece of equipment, or if you're going to purchase something that, so you can take that contract with them and they will loan you the money up front, knowing that you're getting a reimbursement from the city and you have that contract. So there are ways that if you need the money up front, you can work with a bank or an agency. So there are options that you can work with. Then you can talk to like BizCare or your bank and see what the options are too before you, so don't let that necessarily stop you from putting in an application.
Correct. Yep. I think we had a couple of applicants previously that did that. So how specific should we be in defining the neighborhood most impacted by the project? Could we list a county? I guess that depends on your project. So we have awarded in the first round projects or programs that were very specific, a single point within a neighborhood. And we have awarded some that were, listed as a city-wide program or a not necessarily region, but a multiple neighborhood type area coalition. So that really depends specifically on the project. If it is truly a citywide project, then you can say citywide or multiple council districts or whatever the impacted area would be. I don't know that I would list a county because every county that Kansas City is in has a lot of unincorporated, areas that are not incorporated by the city of Kansas City. And we don't want our American Rescue Plan dollars given to the city spent in Lee Summit or in Liberty or places like that. So it has to be a program that the dollars are spent and the program impacts areas of the city of Kansas City. The news release stated that to qualify for the second round of ReBuild KC funding, organizations or agencies must have been in existence before March of 2021. Is this accurate per ARPA funding guidelines? Yes, it is. So, I mean, the American Rescue Plan dollars were all allocated specifically for COVID relief, and organizations or agencies or groups of individuals that were affected by COVID. So it had to be in existence prior to COVID for it to be affected by COVID. So if we revise our application from last year, do we have to get new letters of support? Well, as I explained earlier, our software doesn't allow you to go in and revise your previous application. So if you're submitting a new application, then yes, I would say you would need to get new letters of support, or if it's the exact same program, you could probably use the previous letters of support you had. Are 501c organizations considered for nonprofit or only 501c3? Might have to look that up unless somebody else on the call knows the answer to that. I am not sure of the designation between a 501c and a 501c3. Are the reimbursements paid out monthly? I think I talked about that a little bit before. We're not we're not restricting to just a monthly reimbursement or anything like that. It will be as needed. And as Nancy stated earlier, you can always work with the grant staff if you know you have an expense coming and you know it's, I'm going to incur this expense on this date. You can work with our grant staff to get a reimbursement process really, really quickly, as long as they know it's coming.
Forrest, I have the answer between what the difference between 501c and 501c3.
Thank you.
Both types of organizations are exempt from federal income tax. However, 501c3s are the ones where they can write off donations, and whereas a 501c does not. I think that the difference between the so I think they're both. That's the difference between them.
Yeah,
shaking his head. So
yeah, like Nancy was saying, that federal designation of tax exempt is a requirement. The bulk of it, though, is going to be how the organization is registered at the Missouri Secretary of State as a nonprofit corporation, and then after that, either structure is okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clearing that up, guys.
Teamwork.
Does this grant funding opportunity have a scoring criteria that will be provided to the applicants? We did have a scoring criteria the first time. It was a 10-step scoring process. We provided that in public presentations to the council at the time, that we were prior to making awards and everything. We did publicly discuss that and go through what those categories were. I don't know if we're going to change that slightly this time or not. So we'll consider putting that on the website. But basically it's, the biggest scoring criteria was, what is the benefit to the community on this? So that's what you're really going to want to emphasize on your application. What benefits to the community this project or program has. Will there be negotiations after award announcement where we will be asked to set the budget or activities differently from what we proposed? Possibly, and I'll give maybe a few examples of that. So in the first round, we had organizations that asked for, say, $100,000. And it was a great project, and we made a recommendation to council. They were awarded that. That's where the meeting with our staff, the one-on-one meeting with our staff is very important, because at that point we can go through your budget and there may be some costs within there that were maybe not eligible for ARP funding. So, a few of those, we did massage those reimbursement amounts a little bit. So if they asked for 100, maybe we ultimately awarded 90,000 or 85,000 or something like that, taking out anything that wasn't eligible for ARP funding. But that's a two-way discussion, with the awardee. So we wouldn't just automatically reduce it without asking or without a discussion of some sort. Can the funds be used to purchase property to house the organization? If the property is used for one of the the categories that we went over earlier, if the property is used for that, then I think they could.
Again, it would depend, if what it's planned to be used for. We'd have to see what it's going to be planned to be used for. Was the
Right.
organization in existence prior to the pandemic? What's the reason
Right.
for it being moved? It would have to be discussed in the application.
Yep, absolutely. So. Who would you like to see the letters of support coming from? Well, so letters of support can be from a lot of different forms. They can be from, from other organizations that have the same goal or the same mission. So, they're supporting this program or project you're proposing. They can be from neighborhood associations. They could be from community groups. They could potentially be from elected officials, although I think our council will probably steer clear of this, but I know I did see letters of recommendation from like congressmen and senators in the last round. But there's no clear guidelines on where a letter of support has to come from. It would just need to be somebody that would support what you're doing on a larger scale.
Boris, I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
Yep, go
I
ahead.
found the information on the general liability insurance, pulled up a contract. It's the contract that I found was from 2021. So unless it's changed since then, it's commercial general liability insurance with limits of $1 million per occurrence.
Okay.
And $2 million aggregate, written on an occurrence basis.
Okay, thank you, Nancy, for clearing that up.
Welcome.
Is staff available to discuss reasons why initial applications were not funded? If you're talking about like the first round, no, I mean, there were a lot of great applications. Getting into the details of why one was not funded because of another is probably not something that we're going to be able to discuss in a lot of detail. Like I said, these were all scored by 40 to 50 different individuals. So we would have to round up 40 to 50 different people to figure out why a score was this or that or anything else. Staff has changed since 2022. Can we get a copy of last year's application? I assume by that you mean the staff of the organization has changed and you don't know how it was applied for before. So yeah, I've had a few requests for that. People have emailed me asking if they can get a copy of their last year's application. If you want to email me, I can get that to you. It's pretty easy. I just copy and paste it out of the database from the previous year. So if you want to know what the application was for your organization last year, shoot me an email and I can send it to you. Can a food truck or trailer be purchased, which will be utilized for the job training program, as well as sustainability after the KC ReBuild program funding ends? I think that would kind of depend on how strong the job training program was. I mean, certainly materials for job training would be eligible.
I would say if how the truck is going to be used in the program, and if that's the main purpose of the program and it's going to continue to be used, yes, we'd have to see how it's, I mean, if that's the main schoolroom, I would say yes, it probably could be. We'd have to see in the application the structure of it.
Right.
A big thing to also put into these, whether it's a building being purchased, land being purchased, or any physical asset being purchased with federal funds, that the feds will always continue to hold a stake in that asset, whether it's going to be sold or disposed of. Before that can happen, the federal government will have to be notified so they can say whether or not they want a portion of the funds when it's sold or scrapped back. Usually with nonprofits, they may or may not want that, but they will have to be notified when that does occur. So that always has to be taken into account. But again, with a food truck, if that's going to be the main schoolroom, then if that's discussed in the application, then chances are, yes, that would be allowed.
Okay. Are there funds for individual home repairs? So in the first round, we had a lot of individuals apply for home repairs specifically on their property. We came to figure out through our learning process that it was almost impossible to contract with an individual. For one, the insurance requirements and things like that are just very difficult for an individual to get and to meet our standards for contracting. So if we have those applications this time, we will probably lump them under one program, and have one organization administer that. So this round, one thing we changed on the application was we are not allowing individual applications. It needs to be with an organization of some sort, a neighborhood association, a community group, a not-for-profit, something along those lines. So next question, I showed up a little late. Are LLCs eligible for funding, or is this strictly for 501c3? It's not strictly for 501c3. That is, a lot of times a little easier for us to contract with a 501c3, but we are not limiting it. It can be an LLC. Do religious organizations qualify? I wouldn't see why not. It's a long one, so give me a second to read it here. If we already started the process of scaling and construction for the project we are asking funding for, can we be reimbursed for that? If so, how far back would be permitted? So the answer to that is, I believe, no. Only costs that are incurred from the date we sign the contract and the date you sign the contract, only expenses incurred on or after that date would be eligible. So
that is correct for it.
Yeah, if you've already spent money on something, that's not something you should ask for in your application. Is there a way for an individual to apply and have a 501(c)(3) nonprofit sponsor them and receive funding? Well, I would say it would be better for the organization to apply, and you'd be rolled up under the organization rather than an individual to apply. Can you please restate the previous comment on the Fed holding interest on the property purchased with grant funds? Nancy, can you restate that comment?
Restate the comment on holding an interest in. So if you purchase land or so if you purchase an asset with federal funds, which in this case it is grant funds that are coming from the feds, just like any asset that's purchased that is a depreciable asset, before you go to sell it or dispose of it, so in the case of an asset like land, before you can sell it, we have to notify the federal government to see if they have an interest in it. So if you sell it and you have funds in it, you get money. So if the city purchases a building, if we decide to sell it 40 years from now, we have to notify the federal government of the funds that we get from it. Before we can deposit those funds and keep the whole thing, we have to notify the federal government. We purchased it for $500,000. We got $600,000 for it. Does the federal government want any of those funds? Do they have a claim on any of those funds? They may say yes, because the profit was made from it, or no, they don't. It's up to the federal government because they had a stake in it because it was their money that purchased it in the first place. In the case of let's say we purchased a van or a bus for transporting students to and from a job program, the asset is going to be junked because it's no longer of use 6 years down the road. Before we can dispose of it, again, we still have to notify the feds. Do you have a purpose for it? Do you want, because the feds have an interest in this, most likely there's a chance they're going to say no before we junk it. But we still have to ask because it was the federal money that purchased it. Most likely they're still going to say no, but because it was the federal money that purchased it, we still have an obligation to notify them to ask, because it was their money that purchased the asset.
Right.
because there could still be a junk fee that is received for it, or salvage funds that are received for it. There's still a salvage value, whatever it may be. So the same thing goes. Especially when it's a piece of land or a building, there's still an intrinsic value when you go to sell it, even if it's 50 years down the road. So if it's what we call a taggable asset, it's something that's depreciable, that you must track the depreciable value of it. We still need to notify the federal government before it can be sold later down the road.
Very good. Thank you, Nancy.
No problem. And again, when we do meet, if you're awarded money and that's the purpose of it, you just mark it that it was purchased with federal grant money. You notify the city before you go to sell it, and that it was purchased with ARPA funds. You contact the federal, whoever down the road has it, and chances are nobody's going to want to deal with it 50 years down the road. And but we still have to do it. It's federal requirement.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. The person who asked that question typed in that they understand. So thank you for the explanation. Okay, a couple more questions came in. Can I use the grant to expand my business and hire employees? I think that there would have to be a job training component within that. So although there are services, one of the categories is services or job training for underemployed or unemployed. So if you had a job training component, the grant could be used to fund the job training component, I believe, but probably not to pay their salaries going forward after the job training was over. I think that's everything I haven't answered, which we took almost the exact whole hour here. So we do have a ReBuild email. I believe it's, if Sarah, are you on here? Can you post that into the chat real quick? I believe it's www.kcmo.org/ReBuildKC. Maybe that's the website. I'll look here and we'll post an email. Oh, Sarah's got it. So yeah, put that in the chat, please, Sarah, what the email to the ReBuild program is. There you go. So that's posted in the chat, ReBuildKC@kcmo.org. If you have any other questions that you think of after this is over, please feel free to go ahead and email us and ask. And a few of the things on here, we've recorded this. Like I said, it'll be up on the website. We'll beef up our frequently asked questions a little bit to address some of the more common questions that were asked on this call. And I think that's it for now. Any city employees that are on here, do you have any parting comments you'd like to make? Doesn't sound like it. So,
well, I got one quick one. I am so sorry for
go ahead, Nancy.
Any organizations that want to do a second round application for projects to like do modifications to their first round projects, if it puts it over the $50,000 mark, that will amend it so that you do have to do additional reporting if you didn't have to do it the first round. So just be aware of that. But if it's on a totally different project, it will not affect your reporting. So if you're worried about that, don't let that keep you from applying if it's a totally different project, because we definitely enjoyed all the projects that we saw coming through, and we would love to see more. So.
Very good. Thank you, Nancy. All right, we are at the hour now. So if you have any other questions, please address them to the ReBuild email that Sarah posted in the chat. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope this was informational to you. Thanks.